Good day and welcome to anyone who is joining the webinar live or watching the recording. We're going to focus in today on 5 mistakes leaders make when organizing data for teams. My name's Kurtis Hewson. I am the lead learner and co-founder of Jigsaw Learning, and really excited to be able to share some thoughts and ideas with you today in regards to organization of data to really help inform our next steps. So following the session, the recording will be sent out to anyone who registered, as well as the slides. The slides have a large number of resources and links that may be of value for you as well to further explore some of the ideas that I'll be sharing here today. So I do wish to acknowledge that I am broadcasting today from Treaty 6 territory, which is traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Dene, and Nakota Sioux, and traditional homeland of the Métis. I acknowledge all of the many Indigenous footsteps, songs, and stories that have marked these lands for centuries. I am aware as well that we have participants joining us from other treaty areas and Métis zones across Alberta, Canada, and other countries. I do know that in the sign up, we had guests joining us from Canadian soil, American soil, and Iceland as well. So recognize all of those many lands that people are joining us from. So when we think about the utilization and access to data within schools, the question is not typically in regards to where do we find the data. It's more in regards to how do we effectively organize everything that we have and what can we prioritize to help clearly inform the decisions and next steps that we're taking as teams within our school. I would argue that one of the issues we often experience is not a lack of data, but how do we make it really clearly organized for our teams to be able to utilize it effectively? How do we move away from just raw, unannotated data to data that can really help us in 3 different ways when it's effectively organized? We want it to be able to flag students that we should be paying attention to, and then also flag areas that we need to be paying attention to within our own classrooms and across the school. It uncovers trends that we need to be paying attention to. It uncovers areas of our instruction that would be valuable for us to explore even deeper. And then most importantly, it informs our next steps. It ensures that we are really honing in on where do we need to go to help support individual and overall cohorts of students. So when we think about the data and evidence that we're organizing, my background and experience in this is through a framework that we've come to know as collaborative response. And we talk about how we establish very purposeful collaborative structures and processes, teams within our schools at different layers, the data and evidence that informs those conversations, and then the continuum of supports that helps articulate, so what do we do when we have students of concern or areas that we want to be able to address. So when we think about that data and evidence, it's really important with how it's organized. So for anyone who's interested, there is our newest book that talks about this framework more in depth than what I will definitely be doing here today, as well as in the slides, there is a link to a video that helps to learn just a little bit more about collaborative response. And for anyone that I see, we do have someone joining new, there is a link to the slides in the chat window. And just a note, this is being recorded and we'll send out the recording and slides following the session as well. So when we look at the organization, particularly of the data, there's typically 5 mistakes that I can admit I've made as a leader, each one of these 5, but we consistently see across schools. And to me, I don't find this at the fault of leaders. It's just how do we recognize areas that we can think about and strategize to improve. So when we think about organizing our data within the school, here's 5 mistakes that I'd like to reflect upon, and I will then share how do we go about addressing those within our own schools. So first, is when we have not provided a clear alignment to the priorities within the school. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth in a few moments. When the data has not been compiled for synthesis by our team, sorry about that, and that it's just raw data that is really hard to be able to maneuver and access for our teams to actively and accurately respond. When there hasn't been criteria established for color coding, we're going to talk about how critically important the concept of color coding is for our data and how it can really ensure that data is not only visualized, but more clearly accessible for our teams to be able to respond. When the data is solely organized by class and actually helps to reinforce individualism within our school rather than the work of collaborative teams. And then fifth, when that data is focused solely or overwhelmingly on an overall score or a letter, rather than breaking it down so we can understand what that actually means. So we're going to talk through each of these 5 mistakes, what it looks like and what we can do. There will be a large amount of resources and links that you can access. And at the end, I'm going to add in a bonus on top of these 5 in regards to how do we start displaying data across our school and something I've come to know as a school scoreboard. And I'll share just a couple of really quick, simple examples of what that can look like. So once again, as I go through, please feel free to add any thoughts or ideas into the chat window. Let's start with the first, the alignment to our priorities. So within any school that we are leading, we of course want to be able to identify what are our priorities, what are the key goals that we are establishing within our school improvement plan, our advancement plan, our 3-year plan. I've heard it called many, many different things across different school divisions, but essentially, do we know where we're trying to have impact? And then have we clearly articulated how the data is aligned to that? So one of the questions I often hear come towards me is, when we think about the data, what are some of the screeners that we should be utilizing? And by screeners, I mean the universal screens that can give us some overall data to be able to examine. This often comes to me, and to me, it's the wrong question. We shouldn't be starting with what screeners should we be using. The first question should be, well, what priorities are we focusing on? Within my own school, a number of years ago, we had established a core goal in the school that every student will leave our building a reader. That was really clearly articulated for us. And then we built out what would be the key measures that we would utilize, and then the data tools to help us identify who's not yet there and what do we need to do to help support. Really clear alignment between the priority and then how we're collecting data to help inform our growth and progress on that. So let's share a few examples of what this looks like. And for the majority of the samples that you'll see, I know it's difficult to read on the screen. If you click on them in the slides, it'll open up to larger examples for a large majority of this. So this comes to us from a school in Calgary where they had clearly articulated, it was right out on a bulletin board in front, 3 key goal areas. And with each one had a data set that would help inform that. Again, I don't think this is unusual within schools to be able to have this type of alignment for our goals and the data that then we'll use to measure, are we meeting those goals? But when we can start then on our data organization to make that really clearly articulated, we can help our teams immensely. This comes from a school in Big Stone Cree Nation in Northern Alberta, where they assembled within grade level teams. Essentially once a month, they would have a conversation that we refer to as a collaborative team meeting. And they had set, these are focuses of those collaborative team meeting, which align with 3 goals we've identified in the school. A goal around wellness for students, a goal around numeracy achievement, and a goal around literacy achievement. Then what they built out was for each one of those, and again, you would be able to see these when we talk about our literacy focus. Well, we've got a data set that informs that conversation. Our numeracy data set, these are coming right from the school, and then the wellness data set. And again, you'll see that in that particular wellness example, it wasn't necessarily utilizing norm-referenced assessment tools. They built out criteria related to each of these areas of wellness that we are focusing in on. They had broken it down into areas of anxiety, sadness, grief or loss, peer rejection, and being withdrawn, and talked about what each of those mean, and then built out some quick criteria in regards to, is it a 1, a significant concern, 2, moderate, and 3, no concern for us. We'll talk again about that criteria and the color coding as we go a little bit, but again, clearly align that we have a data set that goes with each one of our priorities. Within a school in Edmonton Public in central Alberta, or central northern Alberta, there is, in this particular school, in their data set, and you can click on this to open up an example, they had 3 core goals that they were working on in the school. One was related to a reading goal, next was a writing, and then finally a math, and they had a key measure that they were utilizing for each one of those. In their data sets, they had that clearly articulated for them. This is another example of a school that said we're having a key priority area around executive functioning within our school. So within that, they built out a student quiz, and then from that could start gathering data in relation to that particular priority area. So ensuring that we have a really clear alignment, and it doesn't mean that we have to have 22 data sets in relation to each priority area. Can we identify some really core or key ones that's clear for our staff? So before we even start organizing, we have to ensure that there's that clear alignment for us. Number 2, have we compiled it for our teams? I made the mistake of saying, bring your data to a meeting without clearly articulating what that meant, because we're going to talk about our data and respond, but we didn't have a process yet. We hadn't brought this together. We would have teachers come with stacks of materials, binders in some cases, of students writing, of their assessment results, of different tests, even sometimes assignments that they've done. And it was just very, very hard to compile that. And even when we did start to break it down into a particular example like this, it was still felt like raw data that was really hard to mine. When we talk about compiling it for our staff to be able to engage with it, we do want to get to a place, and we'll talk about some of the aspects that you see within this particular data overview. And I'm intentionally sharing many different samples to know it does not have to look the same in every school, but there's some key elements that should be considered from a leadership perspective. The first off is, do we have a way to organize it based on not just student alphabetically, but on an overarching score? And we're going to talk about why just the overarching is not enough. You can see within this, they also break it down into specific areas of focus from that particular data set. But organizing it this way helps us really clearly articulate who are the students that we need to be able to attend to. And then identifying, as we're reviewing, what is a key area that we're seeing as an area of need or challenge for a student, which helps us not only in the individual student response conversations, but also in the grouping of students of, are there commonalities for us? And then what I would consider to be the most critical part of any data organization system is criteria to allow us to color code. So thinking about those core elements definitely helps move us from a raw data set, which takes time and energy to be able to dig into, to one that helps assist the next step conversations to be more succinct and specific for our students. So that leads us into that third mistake, is when the information hasn't been color coded. So we know, and we've learned over time, that the color coding has immense benefits for us when teams are looking through the data. It helps even at a glance for us to visualize and see what and who we need to be paying attention to. Very, very different than bring your binders or samples for this work. And of course, there's always times or opportunities where we may want to go through student work sample analysis, absolutely. But when it comes to the overall data, being able to put that criteria that allows us to color code is so critically important. I'm reminded of a principal in a primary school where they had their key reading data. One was from November that you see on the left. Next was from March. They even took the students' names off, put it in a public place, because even just the visual can show how much less red and more green there is. And again, the color coding doesn't have to be overly sophisticated. I often use a very simple structure when working with schools, of red being students who are not yet meeting expectations, yellow being those that are approaching, green being those that are meeting expectations, and then blue being those that are exceeding. And I have seen some schools that kind of lump their green and blue together, that they're either meeting / exceeding expectations. I personally like the addition of the exceeding, because then it can help formulate or engage in an enrichment conversation. So this particular data set, again, you can see within this, and of course names were removed for the student, but in these specific areas, not only are we able to see for students what are some key areas that we should be focusing in on, if we go vertically, we can start to see overall trend areas that we would want to be able to attend to within this. Putting that criteria and the color code is just absolutely critical for us when we're prepping data to bring to our teams. So again, you can see within this particular example that we had the key leveled reading assessment data, but that there's clearly articulated what would make a red, yellow, green, blue, and same with a simple number operations assessment that was being used, again, as an indicator to flag who should we likely be paying attention to in our conversations. This also then helps immensely when we come, and if anyone's interested in learning more about this collaborative team meeting structure, you can click on that little icon that you see, and I'll pop it into the chat window as well to gather some further information about that. These help, or the data coloring helps these conversations immensely, where we can say, come ready with a student. And instead of saying, come ready with a student that you're concerned about, we can say, come ready with a student that the data says is yellow, for instance, a student who is close. And it helps us to take all of the attention off the same students over and over. And we find that without that infusion of the data, oftentimes it feels like the same students are coming up for conversation across our school, students that are at risk, that have complex needs. And the color coding of the data does help us, especially in the collaborative team meeting conversation, be able to say, who's a student that the data says is close, that's yellow, and what's a key issue that you're seeing? Then what it allows us to do in the process is attach other students who have a similar key issue, and then we can brainstorm. What is it that we could do for the key issue rather than for the student? It's a slight change of focus that has an incredible impact on solution-focused conversations for us. So again, it's not the intent of this webinar to go into that collaborative team meeting element, but the color coding of the data really helps those conversations at that level. This example comes from a high school I was working with recently that said, you know, we really don't have screener data necessarily. So I went right back to, well, what's a key priority within the school? And they said, we have a goal around increasing student achievement and graduation rates. And I said, well, you have report card data, that could be an indicator. And we went to some very, very simple criteria to help color code their end of semester results. So then they could take that data and start to have a conversation. But once you color code it, it became really clear on where we could go with our supports. I've become a believer now that if you're bringing data to teams to be able to analyze, if it's not color coded, it's going to just add one more potential barrier for people to be able to really focus on responding. So fourth mistake that we see, and again, one that I made as an administrator, is organizing the data solely by class. And what I mean by that is this teacher, here's your student data, this teacher, here's your student data, and separating that out. Now, there is a time where that is valuable, but I would say it shouldn't be an either or, it should be a both of how can we give classroom data, but then also amalgamate it so that we can really reinforce, rather than saying this is teacher A's data and teacher B, we can reach a place of saying, no, this is our data. What this does is it reinforces that collaborative culture and that understanding that these are our students, even though this may be a student that is in your class or taking your particular course, really helps us tremendously to be able to have that universal, these are all of our students, culture that just gets reinforced through the examination of the data. It also helps us to break down the understanding that we may have students with similar needs in different classrooms. How could we work smarter and find ways to be able to help bridge between classrooms? It also helps us when it comes to the disbursement of resources, that we do not have to engage in equality, that every classroom gets exactly the same, because our data may suggest that there's classrooms with higher needs that we need to be able to attend to. Once we began combining this data, it led to much, much deeper team level conversations for us. Initially, it was difficult to be able to see my class data up against your class data, and then with another class as well. But in time, it really helped reinforce the team approach that we were taking. So within this particular example, being able to break down, and this is what we did within our own school, some of our reading screen data, and then could break it down based on those colors and really see which students were needing support and in what areas overall, could really help hone in on where should we go next in our professional learning and in our responses. So the fifth consideration, and I see this one often, especially within our province of Alberta, having introduced some new provincial assessments, is when the assessments get then communicated purely by overall score. So as you can see within this example, being able to have just that overall that is there, it can help flag who we should be paying attention to, but it may not give us the information around why. Why are they having that particular struggle? Now, we can tease that out, obviously, through conversations within our group, but ideally what we'd want to be able to do, as you can see in this example of a school that was using a numeracy assessment, where even though they have that overall score, they've put in a component of, so when you're reviewing that data, what are you seeing as a key issue? Even better, I like the idea of, we have the overall score that you can see here under September, January, but then over to the right-hand side, we can also see that broken down by topic area or by question type, to help us to get a little bit deeper, not only for the individual student, but for a cohort as a whole. And so you can see within this particular example, being able to take two teachers' data, put together, and then saying, okay, together, what is it that we could be doing for our students? So this does take a little bit of a skill set for leaders in regards to organizing data. And I would suggest, if you're really uncomfortable utilizing Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets, to be able to have a team member that is skilled within this, or someone in your front office that can assist with this work as well. And really, if there were two skill areas that you work on building, and I've added in some links in the slides to help with this. First off is being able to sort and filter. That's a key functionality when you're organizing that data. And I do have a link in the slides of just some help documents in regards to whether you're utilizing Microsoft, Google Sheets. They're fairly similar functions between the two, but being able to sort and organize our students is important. The second, in reference to the color coding, is knowing how to build in conditional formatting. Both of these are fairly simple functions within Excel and Sheets, and really don't take a whole lot of time to be able to master, to be able to build some of the resources like you've seen in the different samples. Again, that conditional formatting and being able to color code that data becomes so critically important for us. So last piece, as we look to end off here, and for those that are in the live recording, once the recording is off, we will pause at that point so that if you have any questions or want to talk about something off recording, we can do so. The next is that the bonus idea of not just organizing it for teams, but how can we utilize this idea of a school scoreboard? This was something that was I was intrigued with from a business perspective of hearing businesses that would set up data scoreboards to be able to track growth and progress, and thinking about what would that look like within a school. So this is a particular school where we began to organize based on grade level some of their data based on the color code criteria, and could start tracking what are we seeing in regards to the number, and again, utilizing that simple color coding structure of the number of students that the data is indicating as red, yellow, green, blue. And again, this is not about putting a label on a student necessarily, but being able to utilize that simple criteria to help align our responses and next steps. Within this particular school, it was fascinating when they began looking at the overall in their staff room. They ended up putting a number line that would be able to show currently where are we at with the number of students who are achieving acceptable standard based on our current measure or our core measure. What was exciting in this school is when they first began, they had 28% of their students reading at grade level. That was a core area that they were looking at as a whole school. And so we began to track it over top, and within a year that had climbed to 45%. Still a long ways to go, but for staff to be able to visualize the success and the growth and achievement that they were seeing across the entire board really helped build the resiliency and that idea of the collective efficacy that what we're doing is having an impact. In my own school, this was a bulletin board right in the staff room where we would indicate when we would engage in our universal screens 3 times a year, we would go and build updates so that people could see where are we at right now. And what was fascinating with this is we had a simple thermometer that we had put up. And when we did our first screen at the start of the year, we found out that out of our student population of almost 350, we already had 30 students who were at grade level at that point at the start of the year, which then started some conversations of, all right, there's some enrichment that we're going to have to be looking at and considering. That school scoreboard was so critically important. And then again, building out that based on our color code criteria would be able to show for our staff to really visualize, and we build out these scoreboards within our staff room that didn't identify individual students necessarily, but could just reinforce what it was that we were doing, and are we moving towards our target. And again, at that time, it was the audacious goal of 100% of students being able to achieve reading level. We didn't get there, but it was one that we said we were not going to quit until we were able to reach that point. So with that, I hope it's given you a few ideas to walk away with here today on organizing data for teams to use effectively. And I love this quote that comes from Mark Twain: data is like garbage. You better know what you're going to do with it before you collect it. And that has definitely been some key learning for myself in regards to utilizing data to inform next steps. So thank you so much for those that joined live or are going to access the recording. There are some further free webinars that are available through our organization that are on our website. You can see within the slides, and there'll be links there as well. And my contact information is there as well. I'd really encourage you to reach out. If you do have any questions, we also have a large number of educators engaging in our Collaborative Leader Facebook community that may be of interest. We have podcasts to deepen your learning, and really hope that this has provided some valuable next steps for consideration. So with that, I'd like to say thank you so much for joining in, and I wish you all the best moving forward. Thank you so much, everyone.